The shovel blade was a shard of winter sun, biting into the frozen earth. Each heave of clay and stone was a punctuation mark at the end of a long, unwritten sentence. Elias worked with a rhythm that had nothing to do with haste and everything to do with finality. The hole deepened. It was for him. He had measured it out yesterday with his own stride, the way he measured a fence line, precise and joyless. The house behind him stood silent, its windows like vacant eyes. It had been silent for 2 years, ever since Sarah's breath had left it, taking all the air with her. The wind was the only thing that spoke now, a low, mean whisper that scoured the plains and rattled the bones of the cottonwoods. He paused, resting his weight on the handle of the shovel. His hands were cracked and calloused, the skin pulled tight over the knuckles. He was a man made of edges and angles, thinned down by grief until he was little more than a silhouette against the vast, empty sky. He had sold the last of the cattle, fixed the pump, and left a letter on the table for whoever might find the place next. Everything was in order. This hole was the last chore. That was when he saw it. A flicker of movement at the far gate, a smudge of darkness against the pale dust of the road. It was nothing. A trick of the light, a tumbleweed. He blinked the sweat from his eyes and prepared to drive the shovel back into the earth. But the smudge did not tumble. It staggered. It was a shape human and wretchedly slow. It moved with the lurching gait of a thing already broken. Elias stood still, the shovel forgotten in his grip. He was not a man who welcomed visitors. The road to his ranch was a road to nowhere, and people had long since learned not to take it. The figure reached the gate, a rough-hewn thing of weathered, gray timber. It clung to the post for a moment, a small, dark bundle of rags. Then, with a slow, boneless folding, it collapsed. It did not fall so much as it surrendered, sinking into the dust as if the earth had finally claimed it. Elias did not move. He watched the heap of cloth, waiting for it to stir, to rise again. The wind lifted a corner of a frayed shawl, revealing a tangle of matted hair the color of dead grass. Silence stretched, taut and thin. The hole at his feet seemed to mock him, a dark mouth waiting to be fed. He had prepared for his own quiet end, and instead, a different kind of death had arrived at his door. With a sigh that was more rust than air, he tossed the shovel aside. The clang of metal on frozen ground was unnaturally loud. He walked toward the gate, his boots kicking up small puffs of dust that lifted behind him like ghosts. She was a girl, though it was hard to tell her age. Her face was turned to the side, cheek pressed into the cold dirt. Her skin was pale and translucent, stretched over sharp cheekbones. A lattice of scratches crisscrossed her arms. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, a faded calico print that was no match for the biting wind. Her feet were bare, swollen, and blue with cold. He knelt. He was a man accustomed to the signs of suffering in livestock, the dull eye of a sick calf, the labored breath of a foundered horse. He saw the same finality here. But as his shadow fell over her, her eyelids fluttered. A tremor ran through her thin frame. She was alive. And then he saw it. The slight, unmistakable swell of her belly beneath the thin fabric of her dress. The sight was a physical blow. It struck the air from his lungs, a sharper pain than the cold. A child. Life, insistent and unwelcome, had not just appeared at his gate, it had collapsed there, demanding notice. He looked from the girl to the empty grave he had just dug, a perfect rectangle of despair. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He hesitated for a long moment, a war waging in the vast silence of his soul. He could walk away, turn back to his hole, finish his work, and let the plains take her as they took everything else. It would be simple. It would be clean. But Sarah's face swam in his vision, her eyes not accusing, just watching. He had been a good man once. He remembered the shape of it. His hands, which had just been digging a grave, were surprisingly gentle as he slipped them beneath the girl's shoulders and knees. She was lighter than a sack of feed, a bundle of twigs and air. He lifted her. A small, animal sound escaped her lips, a whimper of pain or fear. She did not wake. He carried her through the gate, his own gate, which he had intended to pass through only once more in a pine box. The house loomed a stranger to him now. He had cleaned it for his death, not for a guest. He pushed the door open with his shoulder. The air inside was cold and still, smelling of dust and pine soap and a profound absence. It was the smell of a place where memories had starved to death. He carried her past the main room with its cold hearth and 2 chairs, one his, one Sarah's, forever empty. He took her to the small spare room at the back, the one that had never been theirs, the one that held no ghosts. He laid her on the narrow cot. The mattress was thin, stuffed with straw, but he had a clean wool blanket folded at its foot. He pulled it up over her, tucking it around her shoulders. Her breathing was shallow, a faint silver thread in the crushing silence. He stood over her for a time, a hulking, awkward shape in the gray light filtering through the single window. He was a man who knew how to mend a fence, pull a calf, read the sky for rain. He did not know what to do with this broken piece of humanity he had brought into his house. Section he left a cup of water and a piece of dry bread on the small crate beside the cot. He did not know if she would wake or if she could eat if she did. It was just an action, a motion to fill the void. Then he went back outside, leaving the door to her room slightly ajar. He did not go back to the grave. He walked to the woodpile, picked up his axe, and began to split logs with a savage, focused energy, each swing a blow against the thing that had interrupted his quiet, orderly plan to cease existing. The rhythmic thud of the axe echoed across the empty land, a sound that was not quite life, but was no longer the silence of death. For 2 days, she did not move from the cot. Elias would enter the room only once in the morning and once at night, a silent, looming shadow. He would replace the water and the bread, which remained untouched. He would add a log to the small stove in the corner of her room, coaxing a reluctant warmth into the chilled air. He saw the faint rise and fall of her chest under the blanket, and that was enough. He did not try to speak to her. Words were useless things, worn smooth and meaningless from overuse. He went about his chores. He repaired a section of fence that did not need repairing. He oiled harness leather that would never again be used. The actions were a prayer of sorts, a way to keep his hands and his mind from the shovel that lay beside the open grave. The grave was still there, a patient waiting wound in the earth. On the 3rd morning, he entered her room and saw that the bread was gone. The cup was empty. And she was awake. She was sitting up on the cot, the blanket clutched to her chin like a shield. Her eyes, wide and the color of a stormy sky, followed his every movement. They were eyes that had seen too much and expected nothing. Fear clung to her like wet paper. He stopped in the doorway holding a fresh cup of water. He did not want to frighten her. He was a large man and his silence could be mistaken for menace. He set the cup on the floor, just inside the door, and slid it gently across the wooden planks until it was within her reach. He backed away and left. That afternoon, when he returned from the barn, a change had occurred. A small one, but it shifted the air in the house. She had swept the floor of her room with a makeshift broom of twigs. The dust was gone. The act was a quiet question. He responded in the same silent language. That evening he brought her not just bread, but a bowl of thin stew, mostly potatoes and broth. He left it on the crate beside her bed. When he came back an hour later, the bowl was empty. A routine began to form, stitched together with raw thread. He would rise before the sun, start the fire in the main hearth, and go about his work. She would emerge from her room after he had left the house, a ghost in the gray morning light. She began to take on small tasks. She washed their 2 bowls and spoons. She mended a tear in his canvas coat with thread she'd unraveled from the hem of her own ruined dress. Her stitches were small and neat. He noticed them when he put the coat on, a line of pale thread against the dark, worn fabric. He touched the spot, his rough fingers tracing the delicate work. One day, he came inside to find her standing by the window in the main room, looking out at the grave of his wife. A simple wooden cross marked the spot. He had stopped putting flowers there a year ago. Now, a single, stubborn prairie wildflower, a splash of purple against the brown earth, sat in a cup of water at the base of the cross. He stopped, his heart giving a painful lurch. He said nothing. She heard him and turned, her hands flying to her belly in a protective gesture. She still had not spoken a word. Her silence was a wall, and he did not know how to breach it. He walked past her to the hearth and stirred the coals. "The wind's turning mean," he said, his voice rough from disuse. It sounded like it came from under floorboards. She flinched at the sound, but she did not run. She just watched him, her eyes tracking the movement of the poker in his hand. That night, he found a better blanket, one of Sarah's that he had packed away in a trunk. It was soft wool, woven with a pattern of faded blue stripes. He left it folded at the end of her cot. The next morning, she was wearing it as a shawl. The blue brought a hint of color to her pale face. The days bled into weeks. The sharp edges of winter began to soften. The sun lingered a little longer each afternoon, casting long golden shadows across the plains. The girl, he still did not know her name, grew stronger. The hollows in her cheeks began to fill out. The life inside her grew more pronounced. Sometimes, when she thought he was not looking, he would see her press a hand to her belly, a small, secret smile touching her lips. One evening, a storm rolled in, a fury of wind and rain that lashed against the house. The windows rattled, and the old timbers groaned. Elias sat by the fire, mending a leather strap. She sat in Sarah's chair on the other side of the hearth, darning one of his socks. They worked in the companionable silence that had become their language. A sudden violent gust of wind slammed against the house and a shutter broke loose, banging against the wall. She jumped, a strangled cry escaping her lips. Her eyes were wide with a primal terror that had nothing to do with the storm. She was looking at the door, at the simple wooden latch. "He used to lock me in," she whispered. The words were so quiet he almost missed them. Her voice was thin, fragile, like a bird's wing. It was the first time she had offered a piece of her past. Elias stopped his work. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as a duty or a burden, but as a person. The fear in her eyes was a raw, open wound. "I don't lock doors," he said, his voice low and steady. He held her gaze. "Not ever." She stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Then she gave a small, jerky nod. The tension in her shoulders eased, just a fraction. They sat in silence for a long time after that, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the storm raging outside. But the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the weight of what had been said and what had been understood. Later, as the fire burned down to glowing embers, he broke the quiet again. "I'm Elias," he said. She looked up, surprised. She hesitated, her lips parting and then closing again. It was as if she had forgotten how to claim a name for herself. "They called me Anna," she said, her voice barely audible. "But it was his mother's name. It never felt like mine." Elias nodded slowly. He thought of the light she had brought back into his house, the quiet industry, the small acts of care. He thought of the way the morning sun caught her hair sometimes, turning it from dead grass to pale gold. "Lena," he said, the name coming to him unbidden. "It means light." She looked at him, her stormy eyes searching his. A single tear traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek. She did not say thank you. She did not need to. She simply nodded, accepting the name as a gift. "Lena." In the warmth of the firelight, she tried the name on, letting it settle around her. The fit. He had brought her in from the cold, and she had, without a word, begun to fill the hollow spaces in his life. He had given her a name, a small anchor in the turbulent sea of her past. That night, as the storm quieted, the house did not feel empty. For the first time in 2 years, it breathed again. The spring that followed was a hesitant thing, a slow green blush on the brown plains. The air grew soft. The child inside Lena grew, a constant, gentle pressure that reshaped her body day by day. She moved with a new purpose, her steps no longer the tentative shuffle of a frightened ghost, but the steady walk of a woman with a destination. She planted a small garden near the house with seeds she'd found in a tin in the barn, her fingers pressing them into the dark, damp earth. Elias watched her. He found himself watching her often. He watched the way she shielded her eyes to look at the horizon, the way she hummed a tuneless song while she worked, the way her hands, now clean and healing, moved with a quiet grace. He had dug a grave to escape the memories of a life shared with a woman, and now he found himself in the middle of a new one, taking shape right before his eyes. One afternoon, he came back from checking the creek to find the loaf of bread she had baked sitting on the cooling rack. It was lopsided and a little burnt on the bottom. He cut a slice. It was heavy, dense as a stone. She was watching him from the doorway, her face anxious. He chewed thoughtfully. He swallowed. "Little dry," he said. It was the closest he had come to a joke in years. A flicker of a smile touched her lips, the first he had ever seen. "You didn't complain about mine," she retorted, her voice still soft, but with a new thread of confidence in it. He cut another piece and ate it without a word. That loaf died in vain, but something else was born in its place. A fragile sort of ease. He started talking to her more in short, functional sentences about the weather, the fence, the hawk that circled overhead. She would respond in kind. Their conversations were like a bridge being built from opposite sides of a canyon, each word a plank laid carefully across the chasm of their shared silence. He learned the bones of her story in fragments, offered up like small, precious stones. She was from a town 2 days' ride east. The man was a preacher's son, a boy with handsome words and weak hands. Jedediah. When her condition became known, the boy denied it and his father preached against her from the pulpit. The town, a chorus of pious whispers and averted eyes, cast her out. She had been walking for a week when she saw the smoke from Elias's chimney. She asked him about Sarah one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sky turn a bruised purple. Her question was simple, direct. Was she beautiful? Elias didn't look at her. He stared out at the land, at his wife's grave. She was kind, he said, the word inadequate. She made things grow. Like you, he gestured toward her small, thriving garden. The comparison slipped out before he could stop it. It hung in the air between them, true and terrifying. He felt Lena's gaze on him, but he couldn't meet it. He had spent 2 years preserving Sarah's memory like a fly in amber, perfect and unchanging. Now, this new life was disturbing the dust, letting in the light. Felt like a betrayal, and it felt like breathing again. A few days later, a rider appeared on the horizon. It was not the slow amble of a lost traveler. It was a rider with purpose, moving fast, kicking up a plume of dust that tainted the clear blue sky. Elias saw it first. He felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. Trouble moved like that. Lena saw it too. She was hanging laundry on the line and her hands stilled. The color drained from her face. She pulled Sarah's blue-striped shawl tighter around her shoulders, her hand going instinctively to her belly. Go inside, Elias said, his voice flat. She looked at him, her eyes wide with the old fear. For a moment, he thought she would run, would hide. But then she straightened her shoulders. She shook her head. No. The rider drew closer, resolving into a man on a fine black horse. He was well-dressed in a dark coat and hat, a stark figure of authority against the rugged landscape. He did not look like he belonged here. He looked like he owned things. The man reined his horse in at the gate but did not dismount. He surveyed the small ranch with a look of disdain, his eyes lingering on the neat garden, the clean laundry, and finally on Lena. A slow, proprietary smile spread across his face. Well now, he said, his voice carrying easily in the still air. It was a smooth, oiled voice, the kind that could make a lie sound like a prayer. Found yourself a little hideaway, did you, Anna? Lena flinched at the name. Elias stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of her. He did not have a weapon. His hands were empty at his sides. State your business, Elias said. The rider's gaze shifted to Elias, sizing him up. He saw a weathered man in worn clothes, a poor farmer on a hardscrabble piece of land. Contempt flickered in his eyes. My business is with the girl. She ran off with something that belongs to me. His gaze dropped pointedly to Lena's swollen abdomen. She belongs here, Elias said, his voice quiet but unyielding as granite. The rider, Jedediah, let out a short, humorless laugh. Belongs? This one. He sneered at Lena. She belongs nowhere. She's a thief and a harlot cast out for her sins. The good people of my town saw to that. I've come to take her back. We'll see what the magistrate has to say about her and her bastard. Her name is Lena, Elias said, his voice dangerously low. And you're not taking her. Jedediah's smile vanished. His hand drifted down, resting on the butt of a pistol holstered at his hip. And who are you to stop me? Some broken-down old widower playing knight? I have the law on my side. She is a fallen woman. My responsibility to reclaim for judgment. You mistake law for right, Elias said. He took another step forward. The space between them crackled with tension. This is my land. She is under my protection. You will leave. Jedediah's face hardened. He was used to people cowering. He was used to his will being done. This quiet defiance enraged him. He began to swing his leg over to dismount, his intentions clear. But before his boot hit the ground, Lena moved. She stepped out from behind Elias. Her face was pale, but her eyes were burning. She was no longer the frightened creature who had collapsed at the gate. The woman who stood there now was forged in the fire of shame and reborn in the quiet dignity of this desolate place. My name, she said, her voice shaking but clear as a bell, is Lena. And you will not speak it. Jedediah froze, stunned by her audacity. I am not a thing you can claim or discard, she continued, her voice gaining strength. I am not your responsibility. And this child, she laid a hand on her belly, a gesture of fierce, undeniable ownership. This child is mine, not yours. You gave up any right to him when you called me a liar in front of God and everyone. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind whispering through the grass. Jedediah stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. He had come expecting to find a broken, weeping girl he could drag back to town as a trophy of his righteousness. He found a queen standing on her own soil, defended by a silent, immovable guard. His eyes darted from her defiant face to Elias's stony expression. He saw no fear. He saw no weakness to exploit. He saw only a unified front, solid and unbreakable. His bluster deflated, leaving behind only the petty, cowardly man he was. With a curse, he pulled his leg back over the saddle. You can have her, he spat, his voice thick with venom. You can both rot out here in this godforsaken dust bowl. He wrenched his horse's head around and spurred it cruelly, galloping back the way he had come, a dwindling cloud of angry dust. They stood together, Elias and Lena, watching until he was gone. The vast silence of the plains settled back around them, but it was a different silence now. It was the silence of victory. The silence of peace. Elias turned to look at her. Her hands were trembling, but her chin was high. He saw the immense effort it had cost her, the courage she had summoned from the deepest parts of herself. He reached out, his calloused, hesitant hand coming to rest on her arm. It was the first time he had touched her with simple, unadorned tenderness. The warmth of her skin seeped through her sleeve. You were brave, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could not name. She looked up at him, her storm-gray eyes shining with unshed tears. I learned it here, she whispered. He did not remove his hand. In that quiet moment on the porch, with the threat vanished and the future an unknown country before them, they were no longer just a man and a woman. They were a fortress. That night, after the sun had set, Elias took his shovel and walked out to the hole he had dug for himself weeks before. Under the pale light of a sliver moon, he began to fill it in. Each shovelful of dirt was a prayer of gratitude, a final goodbye to the man he had been. When the ground was level, he took the simple wooden cross from Sarah's grave, not to discard it, but to move it. He placed it beside the house, against the wall where the morning sun would touch it first. Sarah was a part of the house now, a part of its foundation, not a separate sorrow in the cold earth. A week later, the baby came. It came in the deep of night, with a fierce suddenness that left no time for fear. It was Lena's body that did the work, but it was Elias's hands that helped her through it. His big, clumsy hands, which knew only the feel of rope and leather and wood, learned the new language of a birthing cloth, of a cool hand on a fevered brow. He held her, murmured quiet words of encouragement, and when the child finally entered the world with a raw, piercing cry, it was Elias who caught him. He washed the baby, a tiny, perfect boy, and wrapped him in a clean piece of flannel. He placed the child in Lena's arms. She was exhausted, pale, but her eyes shone with a light so brilliant it seemed to push back the shadows in the room. He looks like you, she murmured, her fingers tracing the baby's downy hair. Elias looked at the boy and then at Lena. He saw the fierce love in her eyes, a love that had survived disgrace and exile. He felt a cracking deep inside himself, a thawing of a winter that had lasted for 2 years. He needs a name, Elias said. Lena looked at him, her gaze clear and steady. Daniel, she said. It means God is my judge. The words were not a defiance aimed at Jedediah, but a quiet statement of fact. Only one judgment mattered now. Elias nodded, his throat tight. Daniel. A good, strong name. He pulled a chair close to the bed. He did not leave her side that night. As dawn broke, painting the sky in soft shades of rose and gray, Lena and the baby were sleeping peacefully. Elias looked at them. This small family that had washed up on the shore of his despair. He had planned to join his past in the cold ground, but the future had collapsed at his gate, pregnant with a hope he had long since forgotten. A few days later, when Lena was strong enough to walk, she came out onto the porch. Elias was there mending a chair. He had brought Sarah's rocking chair out from the silent living room. You're either the kindest man I've ever met, Lena said, her voice soft, or the most foolish. Elias looked up at her, a slow smile touching his own lips. Can't I be both? She smiled back, a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes. She sat in the rocker, the baby cradled in her arms. Elias, she began, her voice hesitant. We can't stay here forever. I have no right. He put down his tools. He walked over and stood before her, looking down at her and the child. This place was empty, he said, his voice low and earnest. Just a shell. You filled it. You and Daniel, he took a deep breath. This is your home. If you'll have it. If you'll have me. It was not a proposal of romance, not in the way the world understood it. It was something deeper. A proposal of family. A promise of shared sunrises and silent companionship. A pledge to stand together against the wind. Lena looked from his worn, honest face to the vast, open land around them. It was no longer a barren wasteland. It was a sanctuary. It was home. She looked at the child sleeping in her arms, a symbol of a new beginning, born not of shame, but of resilience. She reached out and took Elias's rough hand in her own. Her answer was not in words. It was in the simple, trusting pressure of her fingers, in the peaceful look that settled on her face. The seasons turned. The raw scar in the earth where Elias's grave had been sprouted green with new grass. The house, once a silent tomb, was now filled with the small sounds of life, the cry of a baby, the creak of a rocking chair, the low murmur of two voices by the fire. They sat on the porch most evenings, Elias and Lena, watching Daniel take his first stumbling steps in the dust. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. They had built a life not on words, but on actions, on a cup of water, a mended coat, a shared meal, a door that was never locked. This story, it ain't just about rescue. Any man can pull a body from the dust. This is about what happens next. It's about two people broken in their own ways who found the courage to put their pieces down next to each other and see what they might build. It's about the quiet, stubborn power of kindness in a world that's often anything but. See, he dug a grave for himself, thinking his story was over. But the universe has a funny way of editing the last page. It sent him a story that needed a new beginning, and in giving her one, he found his own. He thought he was offering her shelter, but she was the one who rebuilt the house from the inside out. She thought she was a disgrace, a name to be thrown away, but he gave her a new one and a place where it could grow. So here's your naming. For every soul who feels cast out, for every heart that's built a wall around itself, for every person who thinks their only purpose is to see things through to a quiet end. Life might just collapse at your gate. Not as a burden, but as an invitation. An invitation to be brave enough to open it. To offer a cup of water. To fill in the grave you dug for your old self and plant something new in its place. Because the fire only changes everything if something new is waiting in the ash. And if you're brave, if you're just brave enough to look, you might find it's not an ending you're building. It's a home.